Hello. Good evening. Well, we work our way back to Haydn, one of the originators of so many things. Papa Haydn, we say the father of the string quartet, which is true. The first great string quartets and many, many more of them. And the first great symphonies and many of those. But he's also the father of wit and comedy in music when there are no words. There's a lot of humor in music with text that goes way back. But instrumental music that is funny is really Haydn's invention. If you try to find something, go ahead, just go ahead. Try to find something before Haydn and let me know. And of course, what makes something funny is still the same as it was then. But people hadn't figured out the grammar, syntax, the vocabulary for humor in a vocabulary of musical sound until Haydn. And of course, what it has to do with surprise. But in order to have a surprise, you have to have a setup with something you expect. And how do you set that up so that you get a surprise that is not tragic or scary or, in Beethoven, a lot of surprises are often scary. Of course, he's also very, very funny, but his humor is kind of learned from Haydn. So Haydn does two basic things, the global and the local. The big scale thing is that the structures of his pieces are always in conflict with themselves. Now that might sound familiar because I have said that the classical style, which is again a term that Haydn didn't know the term classical style, of course we know that. But what we call the classical style is about subversive behavior because there is no one form that is always the same, like sonata form. As I say to kids, and I've said it to you too, but it is so not a form. You see, that's one way to remember it. You like that? It is so not a form. I just can't believe that it's been waiting hundreds of years for somebody to say that. The Germans could not say that. But the reason is that if you were somehow, like Czerny tried to do, Beethoven's piano student, the same Czerny who thought of the term ghost because of Hamlet's ghost and gave that to the slow movement of Opus 70 No. 1, which we heard last week. Czerny defined sonata form and tried to make it into something that was codified and could be repeated by everybody. And by doing that, he did a huge disservice because people studied sonata form in conservatories and they take lessons and they write books about it. And they think that there's a correct sonata form and there's a way to do it properly. But the idea of sonata form is that all your expectations are either fulfilled or not, and you never know which it's going to be. They're all different. Haydn wrote hundreds and hundreds of sonata forms, and no two of them are really the same structure, because the idea of the structure is surprise. Now, that's the large-scale concept. The small-scale concept, which Haydn also did better than anybody in this new world that came from C.P.E. Bach, but also Haydn invented so much of this vocabulary, is that every little note, chord or note, has a meaning and might be a foreshadowing of something, and it usually is. For example, if you're having a party in D major, which is what some of these pieces sound like. Doesn't it sound a little bit like your garden party, the opening of this piece? And suddenly an uninvited E sharp drops in. Is that E sharp dangerous or is that E sharp friendly? If the E sharp is friendly at first, is the E sharp going to be dangerous later? Now, what do we mean by dangerous and friendly? One thing, really, that if you stay in a key, like D major, that's the key that the party has been thrown in. That's the key that everybody's food is served in. It's the key everyone's dressed in. If somebody comes wearing an E sharp, or an E sharp comes disguised in D major, the likelihood in Haydn is that the E sharp will cause some trouble, if not right away, eventually. Now, how do you cause trouble as a note? It's easy. There are two basic ways to cause trouble. Change the key on everybody, which you can do. Even one note can change a key, but how temporarily or how long, et cetera, that's the trick. And if it's a distant key, it could be very disturbing. And the other trick, which is related, is to be enharmonic. I knew that wouldn't get a laugh. To be enharmonic. Okay. To be enharmonic means to be an E sharp that masquerades as an F. You know E equals MC C squared of Einstein? I saw on the internet, and I know who put it there, but it's a long story, a picture of Einstein drawing on a blackboard, and it says E equals F flat. It's not my joke, but I love it. I think it's extremely funny. So that's basically the idea. Now, the beginning of this, we're going to go through this entire quartet. You're going to hear almost all of it tonight, because it's not like a huge, giant movement of Brahms. The movements are not that long, so we can get through a lot of this piece. Now, the wit and the comedy of Haydn means that he has to set up normalcy, and then he has to dislodge it somehow. The first movement is not even in sonata form. Now, would that upset people? It's not that it's upsetting, but it's a surprise already at that time to have a string quartet or a symphony or a piano piece that starts in something that is nothing related to sonata form. It's a little like a dance suite with variations, basically, and it's a simple A, B, A with a coda. And it seems quite simple, but amazing things happen. And the great thing about this movement is that all of the sudden surprises and everything is set up quite carefully. So let's hear the opening. Let's say, how much of this should we hear? Let's just hear the first 8 bars. Is that okay? Okay, now I'm going to analyze that for about 2 hours. It's very simple, but I'm going to say some things that are fundamental about tonal music, and they may sound complex because I'm going to try to make them incomprehensible. Now, basically, if you're in the key of D major, which this is, you have 2 sharps, all right? F sharp and C sharp. If you add a sharp, keys go by fifths. If you add a sharp, 1 sharp, and it's G sharp, you go up a fifth to the key of A. You're back to your key of D with 2 sharps. If you remove 1 sharp, you're down in the key of G. Now, that is nothing special to Haydn, has nothing to do, it's just basic tonality. So that means, though, that if you take 1 sharp away or add 1, if we add a G sharp or we make a C natural, those are expected, normal, they belong at the party, because going up a fifth and going down a fifth is so normal that you have to invite those people. Okay, so they're your neighbors. So when we hear, that's a C natural, and we haven't gone anywhere astray. It's just that moving down a fifth is nothing. And there's a G sharp bringing us up, all normal. And it gets taken away, and we're back. And again, the C natural. What's that? That's the E sharp. Who put that there? You played that, I thought. Okay. Can you play that passage without the E sharp, just that measure? Just play an E natural. Sure. Let's hear what that bar sounds like.
Right at the bar?
Yeah, let's say.
Second half.
Yeah, second half of the phrase. See? You didn't miss it, did you? That E sharp. Now play it, bring it out a little bit. He's just going to sharp the E, and you'll see that it's not exactly threatening, but it is unexpected. Okay, now why am I spending so much time on that note? Because, first of all, believe it or not, the chord that results from that E sharp is a diminished 7th chord. Now, this is a good audience, all right? You're in shock here. You're not, but you're in shock. Yeah, we know that a diminished 7th chord is a dangerous chord that can do all kinds of things. It doesn't sound dangerous here. That's the point. It doesn't have to. It's right now, it's a diminished seventh chord that is like a sleeper cell. A term also I don't think they used at that time. Now let's go on to the next two phrases, all the way through to the B minor thing. This is the continuation. Now things are starting to happen. It's not a big deal yet. But you probably heard in the first violin another little bit of a strange note go by right here. Did you hear that? See, if you're listening and you hear that, your listening has either improved or it was good before and I didn't know it. And then it goes away. The A sharp, it goes away. Why does Haydn put that A sharp in there? Well, you could say because it sounds nice and it's a nice ornament or whatever, but actually he never does that. They always have a reason. Now, if you take an A sharp and an E sharp, the two notes that have appeared for apparently no reason and uninvited, and in a weak way, they both are necessary for that cadence in B minor that happens a moment later. In other words, they get together and they push it towards B minor, because the E sharp does this. Sorry. And the A sharp, see, they appear as harmless, and then they get together and they move the whole thing to B minor. You know, it's like if it rains and you put up a tent. But they get away, the piece backs away from it immediately. And we're moving towards, we have to go through a couple of other keys. We have to go to G major, which is totally fine, and its relative E minor, until we get back. And we're finally back and it ends. So now let's hear this entire opening phrase with your awareness of, and this is nothing yet, this is just the beginning, of all those little notes getting together, changing the key, and then the piece sort of backing away from that and having a nice cadence. Okay, from the beginning to there. Oh, I like the way you guys did that tenuto on the G sharp. That was great. Did you hear the weird chord that they brought out quietly? You have a, and then, did you hear that? That chord, now this becomes a very, very big deal in this piece. There is a chromatic chord, there's an altered chord, there's an, I can say uninvited, there is a far distant neighbor chord that appears. It doesn't seem that threatening, but you have to realize you're dealing with Haydn. So when you get this, as brief as that is, and it goes away, this chord is a composer's delight, because it is a chord that lives for enharmonic variation. In other words, it likes to disguise itself. It has multiple resolutions. It can exist in lots of ways. So if you listen to it close up, kind of compressed, that's what it did. But if you let it sit for a while, it could also do this. In fact, that sounds almost more normal, doesn't it? That's because this chord has two primary functions, or I should say two important functions. One is as a dominant in a key, and it would be the key of E flat. But we're in D, so it could also resolve to D. That chord in the key of E flat is a dominant seventh chord. It's spelled a little differently, and it's missing a note here, but that we can tell that. If it's in D major, it's called a German augmented sixth, but not by Germans. Okay, but it's a German augmented sixth. Actually, it's also an Italian augmented sixth. We don't have the F, so but the Italians don't call it that either. Now, what this means, if you're following my logic, and which is really Haydn's logic, the fact that that chord could be in E flat tells you what? It will be, right? That it will be, it'll take us to E flat. But it can't get to E flat easily. This is a problem. We're in D major. If you count how far you have to go down in fifths, because remember, everything's up and down in fifths. If you count down in fifths, you have to go from D down to G, down to C, down to F, down to B flat, down to E flat. So you have to pass through at least C major, F major, B flat, and get to E flat. So the next section, the B section, starts in D minor. Now, D minor is related to F major. Is this unusual? A little bit, because D minor is not related in the normal way to D major. It sounds like they should be, but you know how identical twins are. So basically, they're in parallel universes. The relative key of D is B minor, but that won't get Haydn to E flat. So he wants to use that B flat chord and go to E flat too. So he starts in D minor, moves to F major, goes to B flat, and gets to E flat. Now, if you're in D minor, that's fine. It sounds very scholarly what he does here. It's quite beautiful. Then he goes to F very naturally because those two keys are related. When he gets to B flat, he is on his way to E flat, and he's very excited. See if you can hear when it is that he arrives at B flat. Let's start at the B section. F major. Go ahead. Sorry. Stop. They luckily have a rest there. Now you see Haydn's sense of humor. It's all spelled out. He's in D minor, and it's scholarly. He's trying to distract you that this is so interesting. But then he moves to F major, and it's all very pretty, and it stops with very, very high notes in the violin. And then he makes a gentle modulation towards B flat. And when he gets to B flat, bang, he's there. He's excited, and he takes off. It's like somebody who stole something. And he just says, I got it, and he runs for his life. And when he gets to E flat, which is what he's been aiming for, it all stops. Let's just do that one more time and stop on E flat one more time. He's just spelling it out for you. And then he sneaks back. You go ahead. He sneaks back. But he's in B flat still. And when I say sneaks back, sorry, that's great the way you're listening to me. he got to E flat. He sneaks slightly back to B flat, and he makes his way eventually all the way back to D major and starts the garden party again. Now, then there's instead of ending, there's a sudden celebration at the end, which is really just fun. And it reminds me of the ends of lots of Shakespearean comedies where after it's over, there's a party, and before the party, somebody says to the audience, I'm glad you saw this, we're really happy now, I hope you understood it, and can you join us in a party? And then there's a party. It's usually a little more eloquent, but that's the idea. Now, let's see. If you do this without repeats, this isn't that long, is it? Okay, let's hear the entire first movement. You know a lot, you know more than you need to know to enjoy it, so let's see how it goes. It's important not just to enjoy that blithely or with, it's important to understand the humor, I think. But also the other question might be maybe the humor, you get it without realizing it, which is also pleasurable. But if you're the type of person who comes to a lecture, you probably like understanding why you like stuff. Or at least you know someone who does and makes you come with it. Now, the first movement was in D major, which means the entire piece is considered somehow in D major. But Haydn really was a pioneer of exploring key relationships in various movements and creating a large-scale structure. Before the so-called classical period, there was the so-called Baroque period. And the names are a little tricky for the people. Since no one knew them at the time, I always find it strange. But anyway, the people in the Baroque period, most of those composers, tended to write suites, which meant that all of the movements were in the same key, exactly the same key. Everything's in G. There's 6 movements, 5 movements, they're all in G. That started to change as the structure of a large-scale piece started to have scenes, like scenes in a play. And this scene is in D major, and D major is the country that it takes place in, perhaps, but you might move to another key so it's not so claustrophobic when they make the movie. Now, basically, the next key of the slow movement, which we're only going to hear some highlights of because then we'll never get to the other movements, it's quite huge. The slow movement, which is the centerpiece and the main weight and focus of the movement, which is very unusual also at this time, is in F sharp major. What do you think of F sharp major? Come on. What? Difficult key. What does that mean? It's hard. Can you articulate why? You all went to Yale, didn't you? Why is it hard? Why is F sharp major such a hard key to play in on a string instrument? This is not multiple choice. This is an essay question. What?
There's but one natural.
There's only one natural, so you have to think of all the sharps all the time. And the strings, for example, the open strings, none of them are sharps, although there's a lot of really fun stuff for the cello where the open C string is a B sharp. That's kind of irritating, isn't it? A little bit disturbing to look at that. It's disturbing to look at. I think that's the main thing, isn't it? But also the fingerings are a little bit odd. You don't practice it that much, and there aren't as many pieces. If you look at the violin literature, for example, you will find hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pieces in the keys of the open strings, in G and D and A and E. And then you'll find lots of other keys too. But in keys where all those open strings are sort of not important is rough. Now, why did he pick F sharp? That's the question. He picked F sharp because he's making a structure. The first movement was in D, and where did he find himself? In B flat, right? B flat major. Now, B flat is a major third lower than D. So here's the key, and he got himself all the way to here, which people did not do very much at that time. They did it more in the 19th century, in the Romantic period, more Brahmsian. But if you're going to go down a third, if you go up a major third, that's F sharp. So it's a perfect balance, okay? And that means that the last movement, which is also in D, should also have a big B flat component, and it does. So both the first and last movements, which are in D, have these B flat keys, which don't belong. And then the middle movement has an F sharp kind of key. It's very Bartokian. Of course, he didn't know Bartok, but by Bartok liked these kind of arcs of structure, and he used them in quite a few of his quartets, most famously the fourth quartet. Okay, now let's hear some of this music. Let's see, how about just the opening phrase or two, and then we'll go on to the juicy parts. Okay, I mean, there's more, but it's as Haydn often does, the tunes are almost folk-like, and they're very singable and memorable. And the reason he does that, of course, other than wanting to entertain you, which he does, is it's easier to follow the progress of something you can recognize. I mean, that's always been true. With Beethoven, he doesn't necessarily give you a big tune, he'll give you a small idea, even just a motif. and it's very easy to recognize it. Now, let's take a look at the most juicy parts of this slow movement, which of course means the parts where the keys are strange. In a way, you can define the idea of the classical structure in that what's interesting are the dissonances, whether they're structural or local. By local, I mean dissonances you can hear two notes on top of each other, or structural, where you're in a key that's far away, like when we were in B flat. B flat is a lovely key, it's not dissonant. But as a structure, B flat is dissonant to D. Now, let's say you live in an apartment building, which is a sure bet for most of you. There may be an apartment directly above you that in some respects is dissonant. Should I follow this through? That's kind of what I mean. It's a structural dissonance, upstairs. It doesn't have to be, but it might well be. Okay, now, moving back, I'm not going to pursue that further. You can do that at home. Now, here comes a section at bar, let's see, what is it, 28, getting into 28, if you would, where we're going to go all the way, if you don't mind, can you go, let's say all the way to the fermata? 28 to the fermata? Okay, this is some beautiful things. This isn't the most complex, but some beautiful harmonic things start to happen to this very simple, innocent tune. It's important to remember the tunes are presented as innocent. By innocent and folksy, I mean, like most folk music, not only is it easily memorable and hummable, but it doesn't change key. Find me a folk tune that changes key, and I'll tell you Pete Seeger was there. But basically, even then, they don't really change keys. They didn't have capos, They couldn't just start going like this. So, and as you know, Pete Seeger's father was a famous musicologist, the first American to conduct opera in Germany. I mean, he didn't grow up so naive. Okay, so let's get back to this little section right here. Now, it's very beautiful, and what makes it beautiful, if I may say, is the harmonic detours, the traveling away from the key, and the smoothness which way he does it. One of the devices he uses here is to have one note, like a pedal, they call it a pedal, stay as the harmony shifts around it. He does it more than once. Can we play this and have the second violin play louder than you would play in order to be musical? And just so you can hear that the second violin is staying on one note, and just at the moment when that becomes really a dissonant suspension, it resolves. And meanwhile, lots of things are happening. Let's try that. Could you hear that second violin enough? Okay, good. You're still pretty subtle, but it was good. Okay, then it happens again when the piece moves from C sharp major to C sharp minor. So let's hear that, and I want you to hear, actually everyone play the downbeat and just stay there, the first quarter note of bar 38. Okay. Now, when we get there, can we make sure that that is something that everybody registers and writes down and talks, Twitters about? Okay. So let's start at like the pickup to 35. And again, second violin a little louder than normal. Beautiful. Now there's this is very serious and beautiful, but there's still an internal joke here. Now not all jokes are ha-ha funny. By joke, I really mean a pun. And in music, puns can be very funny. And a pun is an enharmonic note, an E equals F flat. But they also can have other qualities. They can be poignant. And the pun in here is really only upon reflection that you get it. Although he does play with it later, which is right here. And then we get this, and it resolves. But that chord also could be the 5/7 of D major. In other words, it's an inversion of what we had earlier in the piece, where we had that B flat 7 chord that made us go to E flat, but it was really in D. You don't need the details. The point is that that chord is now in C sharp minor, but it also is a chord that is the main chord, the dominant, that leads to the tonic, which is the primary chord, of the key that he's not in, of D, of the whole piece. So that means a lot to work out a key, and that's probably another reason he was in F sharp major, because he wanted to use that harmony. Okay, let's go on a little further in this movement. Maybe can we pick up from where we were and just go to, and this will be to the next fermata, which is 62, and that'll be it. I hope that's not too much further than I asked it to. Wait, sorry. In order for this to feel the power of the interest of that note, you need to play the 3 bars before it again. Okay, so you can hear how strange that is. Better stop there and then we'll continue. Now, again, there's so much going on, but the point of what I'm going to explain now is the same point, which is the interesting harmonies have double meanings everywhere. And those double meanings are musical puns, and in this time you're really going to, even though they're not funny, you will get to hear what the result is. But there's that passage where the first violin is playing a tune and everyone else is playing in octaves. That's quite strange. Whoops, that's even stranger. Why is he doing that? It's so creepy and unusual. I mean, does it matter why? I mean, I think I know why. Aside from the texture being bizarre and creepy, which is a nice thing. The other thing is that if he wrote harmonies there, it would be very ordinary, but by you don't know what the harmonies are unless you listen to the first violin, because they're all playing in unison. So it is as ambiguous as he could make it. And ambiguity is something that you wouldn't associate necessarily with Haydn, but it is very important to Haydn. That if everything is clear, the melodies are simple, you can whistle them, they're familiar and fun, ambiguity is a very important tool. The ambiguous harmony, the strange passage, because that's where the mysteries are. And the balance of when things are strange and ambiguous versus when they're familiar is what makes Haydn's world so rich. That's why it's so brilliant. And it was a great inspiration to everybody after that. Then you heard this. So we went to G major, which, trust me on this, if you're not a musician, G major is a step higher than F sharp. It's pretty far away. And it's just like when he landed on E flat when he was in D. So in other words, he's now having a parallel relationship to the first movement. That's important to him. Whether it's important to an audience, all I can say is you are hearing what he did. And the complexity and the greatness of the music is there because of what it is, not what it isn't. And so To him, it was very important to do that, and I think it's something that can be felt deeply. And also, he was a musician's musician, and for someone to study a score and see the parallels in the things that he's doing is just like someone analyzing James Joyce or anything else and coming up with things that illuminate the quality of the work and make it even more exciting than it was when you liked it before to begin with. So he was in D, and he was up a half step in E flat, and now he's in F sharp, and he gets to G. And there's one more thing, that the dominant of G is also that German augmented sixth of F sharp. Aha! Aren't you glad you took those harmony courses? Anyway, it's not that complicated. I just trying to make it sound really impossible. No, I mean, it's really, again, two things: the parallelisms of the structure and the ambiguity of a chord that has two meanings. And the two meanings are both realized. That's really all it is. There's nothing quite like it in spoken language. Yes, you have puns like crazy, but a structural pun of that size, I'm not sure that you can do that. If anybody has an idea of a structural pun that is a huge section of a book, for example, where it means something else, I don't know, maybe in The Unconsoled that happens by Ishiguro, I'm not sure. Okay, now, let's go on a little further with this movement, and then we'll keep going, because what we want to hear now is how he's in G major, and he needs to get back to F sharp. Let's hear how that is accomplished, starting right after the fermata. Okay, hold it. Where did you come up with that note? It's what it says. It's correct. I mean, but that is, you have to realize you're listening to Haydn here. That is a very weird moment, don't you think? Did you look at it twice when you first played it, like this? I'm sure that Haydn had a smirk on his face when he wrote that note, and that when people listened to it, this was only for private use for quite some time, this particular piece. He writes for connoisseurs, and a note like that, if you accept it, fine. But if you're really listening, it's weird. Let's do that again, and just you keep going, but I'll point to that note. It's almost like Debussy appeared for one fraction of a second. Slippery stuff. Now, it did happen, what I said was going to happen. I don't know how I knew this was going to happen. No, but it's true, it does happen, which is that chord that put us in G, it did bring us back. It did, that was the cadence. Now, frankly, when I like to look at scores before I hear pieces, if possible, because it's more fun. And then you listen to it and see if, because all the performances bring out different things, and the score is kind of a pure situation. And when I look at Haydn pieces, if I happen not to know them, and I see something enharmonic or rich like that, I just know that it's going to be, its parallel position will happen, and something extraordinary will be done with it. And I've never been disappointed. I mean, it's brilliant. If you see a possibility, he will do it. Okay. Now, let's leave that movement alone because of the size of this piece. And for the little minuet and trio, this is not a complex piece, but it accomplishes one important thing, which is like a simplified version of this concept we're talking about. The concept is to set up a norm and then to subvert the idea. It's ironic. The structure is being subverted. The keys are going in strange places. The melodies are interrupted. A note appears and it becomes an entire key. Here, it's done very simply because the minuet has a simple rhythm of 3, dum, bum, 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 bum. And Haydn was the first composer of minuets who wrote what we generally call the anti-minuet. Like, minuets are very simple, and people dance to them, and so it's a lot of fun to make it impossible to dance to by messing up the rhythm. You know, he's been called a wizard, he's been called Papa, he's been called the great magician of music, and he's been called a little child. I believe it was Keats, who I talked about last week, who said that he's like a child, because you never know what he's going to do. I don't know how much time Keats spent with children, but I think that's a fair assessment of some aspect of childhood. Okay, so let's hear this, and what you'll hear happens is 1, 2, 3, maybe I won't tell you, let's just see what happens. It's so obvious. Okay, now I don't think we need to do the minuet, the trio, which is in D minor, because we have so much to do with the last movement. But the idea is very clear. 1, 2, 3, da-da-dum, dee-da-dum. It goes into 2, but it isn't in 2. It's da-da-dum, dee-da-dum, da-da-dum. You know, it's 3 against a 2 pattern. It's called a hemiola. Not that that matters too much, but and there are other kinds of hemiolias that are spread long across a couple of bars. But the main thing is that he disrupts the rhythm. And what's nice about it is it's a simple way of understanding the whole concept of disruption. Haydn sets up rules and he breaks them. So he's playing both sides of the game. Now, by the way, I don't usually read too much poetry here, I hope. This stand is so amusing, keeps shifting. But Billy Collins has a sense of humor, he's a poet, sense of humor that is a lot like Haydn, in my opinion. And the reason it's like Haydn is that he sometimes writes about the structure of the thing he's writing. That's what Haydn's doing. If he writes a minuet and starts chopping it up like that, he's writing about how this is not really a minuet, is it? And if he writes in a sonata form and it goes off in the wrong direction for a long time, same problem. And in the first movement, if he can take structures that are just hinted at by single notes and blow them up into whole keys, he's writing about the structure of the piece he's writing. So here's a short poem that I think is extremely amusing called Sonnet by Billy Collins. It's very Haydnesque. You know, when I wrote that falafel thing, I had tried finding something like Mozart in words, and I couldn't quite find it. That's why I wrote that. But here I came across this sonnet, which is perfect. And you know, you have to know what a sonnet is, but if you don't, he's explaining it to you while he writes one, except that he's not quite writing one either. All we need is 14 lines, well, 13 now. And after this one, just a dozen, to launch a little ship on love's storm-tossed seas. Then only 10 more left, like rows of beans. How easily it goes unless you get Elizabethan and insist on the iambic bongos must be played and rhymes positioned at the end of lines, one for every station of the cross. But hang on here while we make the turn into the final 6, where all will be resolved, where longing and heartache will find an end, where Laura will tell Petrarch to put down his pen and take off those crazy medieval tights, blow out the lights, and come to bed at last. I have to say, an actor would never tell you this, but it's actually come at last to bed, not come to bed at last. But, you know, you should know that. Isn't it brilliant? It's exactly like what I'm talking about. So there you have a very good example, and how it only goes into iambic pentameter when he mentions iambic pentameter, and then it disappears again. All right. Either he's going to call me and ask for money, or I'm going to call him and ask for money. I don't know. Okay. Now, the last movement is one of the funniest movements I know in Haydn, I think. Now, he has a movement called the joke. That's not this one, which is a riot. It really is a riot. And audiences applaud at the wrong time. They laugh. And there are other very, very funny movements, including other movements of that joke quartet. But this one is full of devices that are really brilliant comic devices. Let's hear how the piece starts. And I'll just stop you at a certain point. Stop. Was that the end of the piece or the beginning of the piece? Could you play that again and stop there? It sounds like the end of a piece, doesn't it? Okay, that's the beginning of the piece. That's funny. You obviously know that. But what you don't want to do when you hear something like this is not let yourself notice that. In other words, you hear it as the beginning and don't think you're, as an ending, don't think you're wrong. It's the ending. It starts with the ending. He doesn't do that only this once. There are other pieces where he seems to end first. They're called reversals, obviously. And I don't know anyone else besides Haydn who does this, at least not before Haydn and not during Haydn. Things come in the wrong order quite a lot in Haydn. And how do you know they're in the wrong order? Well, because of key structure, or in this case, rhythm and cadence. Like if this started on the first note, on the second note, it would be a lot different than going, because this is 5-1. That's how pieces end. But if you started on 1, it would sound quite different. This of Mozart is the 1 chord and the 5 chord. And if he did this, like Haydn, you'd be very confused, and we wouldn't be all humming. This is confusing, and you break into a sweat, Or you look at your watch and say, did I miss the last movement? Now, do you know of anybody who does this in words? Shakespeare. I found one very good example, it's a really famous example, of everything being in the wrong order only for a laugh. In Much Ado About Nothing, Dogberry, the police officer, gets things in the wrong order all the time. And here's a good example. He's giving a report he's the policeman giving a report. Marry, sir, they have committed false report. Moreover, they have spoken untruths. Secondarily, they are slanders. Sixth and lastly, they have belied a lady. Thirdly, they have verified unjust things, and to conclude, they are lying knaves. And usually after that's said, the other characters go like that, at least in modern productions. I'm not sure they had that expression in Shakespeare's time, but it's hard. Anyway, back to Haydn. It's very much the same idea. Now, the next thing that happens, we'll just play a little bit. You'll hear an open fifth, which I'm sorry, I keep interrupting you. I keep interrupting myself too. An open fifth. Can you find one on your instrument? Yeah, they're everywhere. So the D and the A, he could have given that to one instrument, actually, but it's like a fiddle, an open fifth on the fiddle. Now, let's pretend you can relax for a second. Let's pretend you're studying with, let me put this down, I feel better. Let's pretend that you're Haydn and this is what you wrote. You have to know that, yes, you can write a little fun tune, but this ambiguity is going to be the idea of the piece. Because I could fill that in with, or I could fill it in with, I could do a lot of things. Or, you think he's going to do this? What about, wait a minute. I don't want to give everything away. But here, I just changed the fifth for you. Do you think Haydn would do that? Yes, he does. Because it resolves pretty quickly. What about this one? Maybe I shouldn't give them all away. What do you think he would do this? Well, No, I won't give that one away. But in other words, he starts, maybe he didn't know at the beginning when he started writing this, he just wrote something folksy and fun, like a folk music with open fiddle strings. And then as he brings it back, it gets crazier and crazier. The harmonies he throws in there to change key are just mind-boggling. Okay, let's hear from the beginning, where is the ending, going a little further. Okay, stop. Now, you are enjoying the humor, right? Yeah, it's hard not to. But you also probably could put words to it if you had to. It's changing key all the time, which has a comic effect. It's because it's like the quartet doesn't know where to go, or you don't know where you are. You're turning around, running in different directions. You know, if you have someone on stage in a dance and they run in one direction, there's nothing particularly funny about that, unless they run like someone's following them, I suppose. But if they keep changing direction for no reason at all, and like a goldfish, it starts to be humorous. And it's like they have no memory. Like a goldfish has a 3-second memory, according to an article in Newsweek in 1978. And it seems to me that it sounds like they have a 3-second memory, but of course they have to rehearse this. Then they finally land on another open fifth. And that open fifth, they've had, that's an E open fifth. Well, that's not a terrible place to be. I mean, it's not like he's gone to a bizarre key. We don't know, though, what key for sure, because we don't know what he's going to do. So by having these open fifths and changing key a lot, he has set the stage for this particular kind of comedy where you don't know where he's going to go. And you like that. It's funny. Okay, so let's start right on bar 46 and see where it goes. Okay, stop. Now, you can hear how crazy this is, right? But you can't write this by accident. It's not like there's something wrong with Haydn, you know. I'm sure somebody is writing a thesis about how this music indicates that he had Tourette syndrome or that he was manic depressive. I mean, those things are all very interesting. But it's the music that we need to diagnose, not him. Okay, that's the difference. The music definitely has all sorts of issues that could be perhaps cured with therapy. But anyway, that's what we enjoy so much about it. Why some things which are enjoyable in music when they happen in real life bother people, I'm not sure. But anyway, you get this cadence. And now in Haydn's time, one of the last things you would expect if you were even a composer is this. But once you hear that, the only place you can go is here. Because otherwise, you're not in a key. If he went here, he would have skipped like 125 years. No, he has to go here. Because it's a resolution, that makes sense. But what's great about it is he throws in a wrench of something that almost looks like it came out of Debussy or Scriabin, but he immediately resolves it, and by resolving it, he defines it. So you are, and this is what's great about it, you are hearing, after it's gone, it makes sense to you, not while you're hearing it. That's fabulous. It's only, now a lot of dissonances are like that, but Haydn's are particularly charming and funny and brilliant that way, is that you don't know what they are, and by the time you do, it's because it resolved. You don't have time to figure it out. It's too fast, you know? So, and it happens over and over and over, and when you think you really know it, then he throws in another one, even one that I felt might be a mistake. I had to look it up twice. Okay, let's start and then you heard this passage where it's going it goes to a note. Let me get my score that I left over here. After that happens, it goes up. Now that's something Beethoven loved from Haydn, which is to just stop on a note and stay there for a moment. In Beethoven's Seventh Symphony, it happens all the time. You arrive on a note that sort of disrupts the texture, the harmony. You don't know where you're going to go. And with Haydn, you know it's going to be a good place. Luckily, you're stuck. But he knows how. It's like if someone's driving you somewhere, you have complete faith that even if they get lost, you'll get home. With Haydn, they didn't have GPS in those days, but Haydn had an internal GPS, I suppose. Now we all heard how bizarre is that chord. What is that chord? It's B flat major. It's the chord that when everything went crazy suddenly in the first movement, it's the same key. He saved it for a big dramatic moment in the last movement. He could have picked another key and you would have liked it as much. But deep down, at the whatever unconscious or subconscious level where we understand what he's doing, or at a conscious level if you listen to music that way, or after studying it, or after my telling you about it, you realize that it's the same key that he made a big deal of in the first movement. And that is why he goes there again, because he is interested in a large-scale structure. Excuse me. Okay. So let's go back and hear a little bit of that again. How about, let's do the exact same thing from bar 46 to the B flat major, and this time we'll get out of it. So we'll go a little past where we were. And when he hits that B flat major chord, the rhythm stops. It's not going anywhere. Everything just grinds to a halt. Just like if you were lost in a car and you would pull over. He had a Lexus, and he knew all about stopping a horse, I suppose, or a carriage. It's the same thing. Also, if you're running and you're lost, you stop. In other words, he gets to this crazy key. The first time he took off running in the first movement. This time he stops. That's another balance. Okay, let's get up to that point and a little past. Hold it. Now, that's a great place to stop. Another kind of humor, remember, he was a very practical musician. And he understood that it's not always about keys and relationships and enharmonic notes and puns. Sometimes it's just exciting to have somebody play incredibly high notes. And that happens in many of his pieces where it just gets higher and higher. And it's at this point, it still sounds high to us in that context. But so much music has gone that high and higher. But in the context of this thing, it almost seems impossible. And it's so much fun. And he doesn't abuse the range of the instruments. He saves them for the best possible effect. And in fact, if you have a piece that is always up there, it starts to become an acceptable norm. It could be beautiful, it could be interesting, but when you save it for crucial moments, then you have something extremely special that almost seems like it's not possible. It seems like it couldn't even go any higher than that. And if this were, by Peter Schickele, it would go 4 more notes higher. Okay. Now B flat, it happens again. If we can go to bar 1, 13, 14, 15, 116. The same thing happens. We're moving along and we get to B flat major. Again, everything stops. He has to get out of it and it takes a little while and he escapes through a series of, he escapes the key of B flat through a series of strange things that happen in the cello where the harmonies get really intense. So let's see if we can follow this. It starts, it's in A major, which is the dominant of D, so it's fine. It suddenly stops in B flat, and then it goes through a series of escape routes. Here we go. Okay, hold it. I know it's a hard place to stop, but isn't that crazy? See, now, after all the things that I've been talking about, it's so easy to hear what he's doing. He separates the fifths, he repeats them quietly, and he's taking the ensemble apart. They're not even doing it together now. They're pairing up and breaking the quartet apart. And then, not only do they break it apart, but he's taking the dissonance that he did before and making sure that you don't leave this performance without realizing it. Before, you but now, he's making sure did you hear how clever that was? He's almost asking you. I put those together. But it's also because it's the parallel spot, and he could have done exactly the same thing. But Haydn, unlike a lot of lesser composers of that period, when something is repeated at the end, he never repeats something exactly the same way. And he usually makes it either more intense or funnier or adds something bizarre to it. And here, I think this is a great moment where he breaks it apart and lets you hear what he did. So let's back up a little bit, because there was also a fantastic dissonance on bar. Could you just play bar 151, 2, 3, 154 for us? Just that one bar. Okay, is that Bartók or Haydn? Just try that one more time. Yeah. Now, you don't expect that in Haydn, and I'm sure people were incredibly shocked. This is after Mozart died, this piece, and Haydn was no longer working at the Esterházy Palace. He was on his own, becoming a big star all over Europe. He wasn't writing just for the prince, because the prince's successor, who was also Leopold, was not interested in music. Anyway, so he had to go out and make a living, and he had a great time. But he also had the life and death of Mozart to deal with, and the incredible innovations of Mozart. And there was nobody, because Beethoven was very young, there was nobody who came anywhere near Haydn's brilliance until Mozart popped up, did incredible things, and disappeared. And I think when he does things like this, he was just thinking, I wish Wolfgang could hear this. But I had a little student once, and this is a long time ago, when I was teaching harmony and some keyboard skills to a very, very young child. I think she was 6. And she was playing one piece by Haydn and one piece by Mozart. And I said to her, Haydn lived from here to here. And Mozart lived from here to here. Oops. And she said, oh, but from here to here, was Haydn also alive? That's quite a question. Okay. I'm not going to answer that. I just think it's amazing. Okay. Never forgot that. All right. What is that dissonance? It has to be explained by something, and it's simply explained by it hasn't yet resolved. It appears logically and disappears logically, but he gives it a whole measure, 4 notes worth. It's actually 5 notes worth, because it starts on the 8th note before. 5 notes worth of intense dissonance. So can we back up and just hear that in context, starting from, let's say, 147 or something like that. Okay, great, it sounds great, but I'll say one thing. Right now, the second violin, you probably really didn't want me to stop you right there, but the beginning of this piece, which sounded like the end, is filled in by the second violin. Could you play without him, starting at 193 for a moment?
Oh, sorry.
Right on it is fine. Okay, now let's have the second violin join them. Okay, great. Now, so you get the idea, which is that Haydn is doing what is a kind of a recapitulation. Things are coming back. But there's always a brilliant change. It's a harmonic change, it's high notes, or the addition in the rests of incredible excitement that was not there at all. And it would have been fine without it, but it would have been prosaic. It would have been fine, but nothing is fine in Haydn. It's always incredible. Okay, I think we need to hear this entire movement. There's a little bit more of that, of everything that we just heard. There's more of it happens. And you do get the end, finally, at the end. Okay, let's hear it. Stay there. Okay, thank you. Before you leave, a couple of quick things. This piece will be in Tully Hall on January 21st, in case you wanted to make note of that. Another thing, I said Leopold when I meant Nicholas early on, so if you want to change that name in your scroll backs, that's fine. And then thirdly, what this really is about is a great musical imagination, Haydn's imagination, to hear a fifth and imagine all the things that could happen. To imagine a texture and make it be the point. To imagine a structure. So if you want to explore your own musical imagination, my new book is on sale in the lobby, and it's actually called The Mind's Ear. It's called Exercises for Improving the Musical Imagination for Performers, Composers, and Listeners. And there was a very early version of this book I wrote in 1991, which was very small, and this is 4 times the size. It's still not too big, and has many new ideas, years and years and years worth of revisions. And I'll tell you the story. It's published by Oxford University Press. And how does that happen? This New York story, really quickly. The old book had been published by my music publisher instead of by a book publisher. And I was at a party on the Upper West Side of New York, and everybody at this party was either a philosopher or a musicologist. I was not exactly either of those, but that's fine with me. And somebody said, "You still have that Mind's Ear book that they had seen?" I said, "Oh, well, I am going to put it out myself, maybe just online. I'm going to change it a little bit." And this woman sitting on a chair there said, "What is this book?" So I described it. She said, "Can you describe it more fully?" So I described it in detail. She asked a lot of questions. She said, "Could you send it to me? I'm the director of music at Oxford University Press." Anyway, isn't that funny? So never leave the Upper West Side. All right. All right, great. I see you maybe in the spring or at lots of other concerts around campus. Thank you.